And Governor Tim Walz joins us now. Governor, thank you so much for your time this morning.
It's good to see you, Esme.
What about this shooting of Amir Locke? There are a lot of calls for a ban or a moratorium statewide on no-knock warrants. You have the Gun Owners Caucus, a very conservative group, calling for some kind of action, as does the Posse Caucus, the People of Color and Indigenous People Caucus. What do you think?
Well, first off, a tragic week for Minnesotans. The family of Amir Locke and Jamari Rice, a young man over at the school in Richfield. Minnesotans once again saw that that gun violence, two very different situations, but the end result's the same. We have two young people dead. In the situation of Amir Locke, as we see the video and things play out, yeah, I think there's folks raising their voices who weren't there before. I'm glad to see folks who spent a lot of the last legislative session pushing back on any reforms now starting to speak up, because the fix to this is Minnesotans know we have to have zero tolerance for crimes. A birthday party shooting, that is unacceptable. We have to have zero tolerance on the causes of crime, and we have to have a justice system that's held accountable. So I think when it comes to these no-knock warrants, it's one of the reasons why we advocated a package of reforms in conjunction with public safety measures. So I think this is a step in the right direction.
A possible statewide moratorium on them?
I think that's possible. I certainly don't have the authority to do it myself, but I think with the legislature of hearing voices now that were silent on this until this week, I'm sorry it took this tragedy, but there are voices now saying across the political spectrum that these are dangerous. They're dangerous for, as you saw in this case, a young man, they're dangerous for police. And we need to figure out what the best practice is to make sure, one, we're getting violent criminals or folks that we're looking for off the streets, but this young man had nothing to do with the warrant.
You have activated the National Guard. You said St. Paul has requested, because of the trial of those 3 former officers who are facing trial in the death of George Floyd, you also say that they would be available to help in Minneapolis if it comes to that, and if Minneapolis asks you. Are you concerned about some kind of massive protest or any kind of violence on par with what we saw in 2020?
Well, I think it's about being prepared. First and foremost, we saw 1,000 Minnesotans out on the street expressing their First Amendment rights in a peaceful manner, folks that are traumatized and folks that are hurting. We need to make sure that they are kept in a place where they're able to do that and they're able to do it safely. When the cities who are responsible first and foremost for the public safety, the state is there in support. When the mayors ask and these communities ask, we provide them. So I would say we're not concerned, but I think prudent preparations would have us to be prepared. We have a confluence of things that'll be coming up. We have the federal trial of the 3 officers in the George Floyd death, and we also have the sentencing of Kim Potter in the death. So a lot of those things are there. I think it's to remind Minnesotans that that our communities work hand in hand. They work with the sheriff's office, and the state can provide some support through either the State Patrol, the DNR, or in the case of the National Guard. But they're not law enforcement. Okay. They're there to support.
Governor, when it comes to crime, you just heard the 3 awful stories that we read at the top, that I read at the top of the news. People are scared to death of what is going on in their neighborhoods, in their cities, in the suburbs. Is your plan, which calls for a lot more money for police, enough? Republicans are talking about stricter sentences, especially for juvenile offenders, violent juvenile offenders.
Well, I think all of us have talked about, I think my plan is much more comprehensive. As I said, a zero tolerance for the violent crime, but a zero tolerance on the causes of crime, and also the pieces on the reforms that we saw. Another death, in this case of Amir Locke. I think the one thing is, when we talk about stiffer sentences, you have to think about the psychology that's not developed in these folks. Most of these carjacking suspects are between the ages of 12 and about 16. You have to ask yourself, are these folks going to say, wow, I was watching the news, the legislature said there's a double sentence on this, now I guess I won't do this. It is far before that in other interventions that we can do. I'm certainly open to this idea, but again, as a nation that has the highest incarceration rate, that would indicate we should have the safest of the streets. That doesn't necessarily correlate. So I'm not saying that you have to be weak or you have to do this. Where are you going to put your emphasis? And again, we saw a package come out from the Republican legislature that did not focus in any way, shape, or form on the prevention, on community groups, on a statewide task force that would allow us to gather information, as well as investing in the things that we know work by keeping kids off the streets. So certainly there's the piece of the crime and punishment piece of it, and we have to have zero tolerance on that, but it has to be much broader. And now I will have to say, the one thing that may come out of this this tragedy around Amir Locke is we have folks who told us there were two things they wouldn't talk about. They wouldn't talk about any more reforms around police, and just this week I was told we would not have a conversation on smart gun safety measures. Things that the state of Florida has done, like red flag laws and background checks, we need to have that as part of this conversation too. This is much broader. So folks who are, all of us included across the country, how are we going to stop this from happening? It's multifaceted. It's not just after the fact, if we arrest someone, say it's going to be a double sentence. The crime is already done. And again, if there's data out there to show me that these 12, 13, 14-year-olds are changing their behaviors based on that change, I want to see it.
Let me ask you about hero pay. This debate has been going on, it seems, far too long.
Yes.
You have talked about expanding the number of people who would get the hero pay to people who work at grocery stores, janitors, those kinds of folks. $1 billion in the kitty for hero pay. Republicans want a lot less, $250 million. They want a much smaller group. Do you think you can get the larger pay bump through there?
Well, I think so, because this is about the public asking for this. Just to be clear, our package includes some tax cuts in there, reduction of costs in child care. An average worker out there who's in this hero pay with that and some of the checks we're asking them to get back could receive almost immediately well over $2,000. That helps is it pays for gas, it pays for groceries, pays for formula, pays for diapers. And I think that's the way to go. I think telling folks that no, we don't want to do this. These were folks that we asked to go into the most dangerous situations before we had a vaccine, before we understood what we know about COVID, to continue to either process our food, teach our children, or care for us in the hospital. So when I see these proposals out there that we need to have this big proposal to hire more folks, we need to make sure that we're not leaving behind all these other professions.
Okay. You have been ridiculed by Republicans for these Walz checks that would provide $150 to single people, I think $350, actually $175 to single people, $350 to couples. Now it seems that the Republicans are saying they'd be okay with a larger amount of money going to individuals, as long as it's not called a Walz check.
Yeah, if I say it's Sunday, they'll say it's Saturday. I don't care what they call it. The issue on this is that I think that the surplus that's there, pay our bills, make sure we have a rainy day fund, invest in the people that paid the highest price during COVID, and get money back in the hands of people right now. Some of these tax proposals, which I'm open to and listening to, that's fine, but they won't go into effect till 2023. We have the ability to send this back to folks right now. It's a surplus that was generated by, in the main part, corporate profits, but money that people spent. If there's more to be put into it, I'm certainly open to that. And they can call them what they want, but as we were saying, Minnesotans have a long memory of this. This has happened before one time. They received the checks back.
All right. Let's talk about education. I think parents are also scared to death about where their children are and how much their children may be behind or have not learned things that they are supposed to do. You're calling for a 2% per capita increase in the funding for school children. I think parents out there probably say, well, that's fine, but how can I make sure that money gets into my child's classroom to help my child catch up?
Yeah, it's targeted for exactly that. It's targeted in some cases for the mental health pieces of this. It's targeted for some of the creative things that school districts are doing. So that piece of it, the 2% formula goes on top of that. But we have a much vaster program that was aimed at exactly that. And the thing I would say on this, and I'm going through this with a freshman, a 15-year-old in the St. Paul Public Schools, I think we share all of those concerns, but I'm fascinated too because when there's friends over or we're going to some of these events, this is a resilient group of kids, and there's something in here we have to understand too. They're seeing and learning the world a little differently through this, and I think, again, trust in our kids, make sure our schools are there, make sure we're supporting our teachers and the support staff that's there, is we can get there. And again, there is the content knowledge that students need to get, but there's the social, emotional piece that they need to have too.
The Southwest LRT is now going to be ballooning to $2.75 billion. I have a quote here from a top state official that says, I certainly will not recommend that any additional public money be committed to the project. I am satisfied until I'm satisfied that its costs can be just and properly managed. The same person says he's shocked and appalled. This was Mark Dayton in 2015.
Yeah.
Who is watching this project? And that he was talking about when it was $1.67 billion.
Yeah, and these projects in this one, and I've said that too, that we have an accountability on this. We have a unique structure in Minnesota with the Met Council. We have a lot of entities here. This is city, county, state, federal dollars working together. We have project managers and contract folks on there. When they run into these change orders, it's not that unusual, but we've seen a lot of these projects come in under cost and under time. So I think the biggest thing is for us to, again, recognize we're going to need a modern transportation system for a growing state. We're the 15th fastest growing state. Transit is going to be a part of that, but having accountability of this project, I fully support that. I think the model here is, when I first came into office, some of your listeners or your viewers might remember, we had the Minlars debacle with the licenses or whatever. It had been going on for 10 years. We simply took a step back, we hired professionals to come in, we created a public-private partnership, and we fixed that thing moving forward. I would ask for the same thing to be done on this.
And quickly, our friends at KSTP have a polls that came out this week that showed two Republicans gaining a lot of ground very quickly on you, former Senator Scott Jensen and also former Majority Leader Paul Gazelka. Are you concerned about this?
Well, I don't spend a lot of time on polls. I've got my day job to do. I think Minnesotans, when they start paying attention, will make some good decisions on that. I only half tongue-in-cheek said I think the real question is if I win, will they recognize the election? We're still trying to get answers on the last election, so I don't know what polls mean. I'll do the best I can. I think we've managed COVID as well as any state in the nation. We have a budget surplus, and we're working to solve problems bipartisanly.
Well, Governor Walz, thank you so much for your time this morning. We
Glad
really
to be with you.
appreciate it.